I'm not looking to make T-shirts, to be honest. I'm not looking to make socks. We can do that very well at other locations. We are looking to do chips and computers and lots of other things. Military equipment, we want to make big things. We want to do the AI thing with the computers and the many elements. But the textile, she just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because...
Imagine trying to make America great again, but instead you lose $2 trillion, hurt iconic American brands, and push Europe straight into Canada's arms. That's exactly what happened with Trump's steel tariffs. How did raising the price of bourbon and motorcycles in Europe lead to Harley-Davidson packing their bags? And what does Canada have to do with it? Let's break down this ironic masterpiece of unintended consequences. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Donald Trump wanted to rewrite the rulebook on global trade, claiming it was all about putting America first and protecting American jobs.
I've told you specifically, I told anybody that would listen, they have to do that. And military equipment, we want to make big things. We want to do the AI thing with the computers and the many elements. But the textile, we had a very nice call, and I agreed to move it. I believe July 9th would be the date.
What happens when the new rules set a trap for the players who wrote them? That's essentially the story of Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum, introduced in 2018 under the familiar slogan of Make America Great Again. These tariffs slapped a 25% tax on imported steel and a 10% tax on aluminum. The idea was simple: make foreign imports more expensive and drive up demand for US-made materials. Sounds straightforward, right? But this strategy ended up being like trying to protect your house by setting your neighborhood on fire. Sure, you saved the house, technically, but now everything around it is in ruins, and in this case, the wreckage included American jobs, businesses, and industries. Here's where the story takes a turn. The tariffs were supposed to breathe life back into struggling industries like steel and aluminum. That part did happen.
I'm not looking to make T-shirts, to be honest. I'm not looking to make socks. We can do that very well at other locations. We are looking to do chips and computers and lots of other things. I've told you specifically, I told anybody that would listen, they have to do that. And that was the date she requested. Could we move it from June 1st to July 9th? And I agreed to do that. And that she said we will rapidly get together and see if we can work something.
Kind of. Around 1,000 jobs popped up in those sectors. Not exactly the economic revolution promised, but hey, it was a start. The problem? Elsewhere, it was a full-blown meltdown. Industries that relied on steel and aluminum, think cars, construction, appliances, got hammered by skyrocketing material costs. Take Ford, for example. The automaker publicly admitted that the tariffs cost them roughly $1 billion in profit. Billion with a B. That's enough to make even the world's biggest car companies feel like they're driving on fumes. And Ford wasn't alone. Across the board, manufacturers were burning through cash to keep up with inflated prices for raw materials. Talk about friendly fire. Now let's zoom out. The tariffs weren't just a headache for manufacturers, they were a gut punch to American workers. A report from the Tax Foundation found that these policies wiped out 142,000 jobs in the long run, shaving 0.2% off the US GDP in the process. Keep in mind, the steel and aluminum sectors gained a meager 1,000 jobs total. So, for every position saved, almost 140 others got cut or simply vanished. It's the economic equivalent of throwing a lifeline to one ship while watching an entire fleet sink. Within a year of the tariffs taking effect, an estimated 75...
She just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because she just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because
1,000 jobs were gone. 3/4 of a football stadium's worth of workers out of work, trying to build up one industry by kneecapping several others. You couldn't make this up if you tried. But here's where it gets even stranger. You'd think a move like this would mostly hurt industries that rely on international supply chains. And sure, those companies got hit hard, but some of the biggest casualties were from parts of American life Trump claimed to care about. Middle-class jobs and blue-collar workers. Truck drivers, line workers, welders. These were the people left hanging when factories slowed production or shut their doors altogether. It wasn't just some dry economic data point, it was real people suddenly staring at unemployment lines. And while politicians talked tough on trade wars during press conferences, families across the country were scrambling to figure out how to pay rent. There's a bitter irony here. These tariffs were meant to revitalize American manufacturing, and all they did was send it spiraling. It wasn't just that companies found it harder to compete, it was that foreign competitors were laughing all the way to the bank. Some industries ended up outsourcing more jobs just to avoid the crushing costs at home. Then there were the smaller businesses, the local workshops that couldn't find ways to cut corners and had no choice but to pull the plug altogether. Meanwhile, those 1,000 new steel jobs. Yeah, not much comfort when you weigh them against the devastation elsewhere. That's like celebrating because your sandcastle survived while the ocean wiped out an entire beachfront town. And yet somehow this wasn't even the worst part of the story. While Americans were grappling with higher prices and fewer jobs, the rest of the world was getting ready to hit back, and they weren't pulling any punches. Countries affected by these tariffs weren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They retaliated, choosing their targets carefully like a chess grandmaster setting up a checkmate. And Europe. They were about to play the kind of move you'd expect from someone who's both angry and oddly strategic. Instead of throwing darts at random, they went after some of America's most iconic exports: bourbon, motorcycles, Levi's jeans. These weren't just products, they were symbols of American culture. It wasn't just about economics anymore, it was personal. Europe's counter tariffs wouldn't just hurt American companies, they'd hurt the image of the rugged, all-American dream. The fallout was brewing like a storm cloud in a summer sky, and it soon became clear that the damage wouldn't be limited to factories or corporate boardrooms. Small businesses, family-owned companies, and even political strongholds were about to feel the heat. In the meantime, Europe's plan wasn't just to punish the US with retaliatory taxes. They had something bigger in mind, something that involved stepping away from the US entirely. And as bourbon barrels started gathering dust, a Canadian opportunity would come knocking. When the European Union decided to retaliate against Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs, they didn't just slap some random penalties together. They went for the jugular, targeting America's cultural pride with precision. Bourbon, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and Levi's jeans. These aren't just product, they're woven into the story America tells about itself. Freedom on a roaring bike, rebellion in a pair of denim, and a glass of whiskey that tastes like the frontier. That's why the EU knew exactly where to aim. And the results? Well, let's just say this counterattack left more than one American icon limping. Let's start with bourbon, the amber liquid that's as American as apple pie. If apple pie were 51% corn and aged in charred oak barrels, the EU slapped a 25% tariff on American whiskey exports, and the consequences were swift and brutal. Within months, bourbon shipments to Europe took a nosedive, plummeting by over 30%. It wasn't just a blow to the distillers, it was a body shot to Kentucky. This was no accident. Kentucky is Mitch McConnell country, a Republican stronghold, and home to some of the most famous bourbon brands in the world. By choking off their access to one of their largest markets, the EU turned the economic tables, forcing Kentucky's beloved distilleries to let barrels of bourbon sit idle instead of shipping out to thirsty Europeans. Imagine warehouses stacked high with aging whiskey, not because of quality control, but because of a trade war stunt. That's enough to make any bourbon lover cry into their empty glass. Then there's Harley-Davidson, the chrome-clad symbol of the Great American Highway. Europe was Harley's second largest market, so when the EU added hefty retaliatory tariffs on their motorcycles, it hit the company like an economic pothole. To avoid saddling customers with higher prices, Harley-Davidson made a controversial decision. They shifted some of their production overseas. Yes, Harley, the company that markets itself as the epitome of made in America, decided to build bikes in places like Thailand. If that feels a little ironic, well, you're not alone. A motorcycle meant to embody independence and freedom suddenly became a case study in global supply chain flexibility. The backlash at home was immediate, with Trump himself blasting the company on Twitter for betraying its American roots. But Harley wasn't exactly eager to go bankrupt just to make a political point. They were clear, the tariffs forced their hand. So while Trump pushed a trade policy that was supposed to protect American manufacturers, Harley-Davidson, a company that practically screams American steel and grit and was shipping production jobs overseas. Ironic, that's putting it lightly. It's like a cowboy switching from riding a horse to driving a Prius. It just doesn't fit the image. Of course, the EU knew what they were doing. They couldn't exactly retaliate against each and every US product, so they picked targets that would sting the most both economically and culturally, and it worked. Harley-Davidson's costs soared, its stock price slumped, and its reputation took a hit. The EU had roasted an American icon, and all they needed to do was tweak a few tax rates. If you're wondering about the bigger picture, here it is. The EU wasn't just trying to punish the US. They were making a point. These tariffs didn't impact faceless corporations. They hit communities. Harley's struggles affected blue-collar workers tied to their factories. Kentucky's bourbon troubles meant less revenue for distillers, local businesses, and the families who depend on them. Trump's bold trade war, which was supposed to lift up these very people, had handed them a barrel of problems instead. And while economic numbers tell one version of the story, the backlash went far beyond balance sheets. The world watched while Trump's plan to show America's strength ended up highlighting its vulnerabilities. Instead of looking like a sheriff laying down the law, Trump looked like the guy who started a bar fight and got his nose bloodied. But maybe the wildest part of all this isn't even the tariffs or the economic fallout. It's how Europe seemed to rub it in. You can almost see them smirking as they checked off their list. Bourbon, motorcycles, denim. What's next? Hot dogs and baseball caps. The truth is, the EU's counterattack worked brilliantly, especially in showing how interconnected global markets are. No country, no matter how influential, can throw their weight around without expecting blowback. The EU didn't just target products, they targeted symbols, and in doing so, they turned Trump's economic nationalism into a bit of an international joke. This wasn't some minor loophole either. CITA facilitated trade between two massive economies, and the results were hard to ignore. European businesses didn't just survive Trump's tariffs, they thrived because of them. Meanwhile, Canada played its role perfectly. By acting as Europe's gateway into North America, they gained a surge in economic activity and tightened their ties with EU member states. McKinsey even called this kind of shift a masterclass in playing the trade game. And that's exactly what it was. While Trump was busy trying to isolate the US economically, the rest of the world was busy making new friends. Canada, for its part, didn't just benefit from more access to European goods. A deal like CETA put Canada on the map as a major player in global trade. Before, they were often seen as the US's quiet northern neighbor, but now they had found their own voice with agreements that gave them direct access to one of the largest economies in the world. This wasn't just a win for their business. It was a prestige bump on the global stage. And the irony, none of it would have been possible without the chaos caused by Trump's trade war. Think about how wild this is. Trump wanted to isolate America from unfair trade practices. Instead, he turned European and Canadian firms into greater partners. By punishing imports, his administration pushed nations like the EU to look everywhere except the US for better opportunities. It's like trying to stop a party by slamming the door, only for it to spill into someone else's house where the music gets even louder. And the numbers back this up. Trade between Canada and the EU boomed thanks to CETA. It wasn't just theoretical, it was tangible growth that gave European firms better options, while Canada saw an injection of economic energy. Meanwhile, on the US side, manufacturing sectors were licking their wounds from the tariff backlash. The strategy to make America great again was starting to look more like make everyone else stronger while you struggle. It gets even more ironic when you zoom out a bit. The whole point of Trump's tariffs was to rein in globalization, or at least reshape it in America's favor, but it achieved the opposite. CETA and other agreements like it highlighted just how interconnected and how adaptive the global economy is. You add a tariff here, and suddenly, goods find their way around it over there. It's like squeezing a balloon. The air doesn't disappear. It just shifts to another spot. The McKinsey report called this trend a new trade paradigm, where nations that traditionally relied on the US for economic partnerships begin turning to each other instead. And Canada's role in this? It wasn't just a happy accident. It was the result of careful strategy that left America looking like the odd one out. Of course, this wasn't just about Europe and Canada. Other nations were watching too. When the EU found a workaround with CETA, it set an example for countries facing similar challenges. It showed that if the US wants to play hardball with tariffs, there's always a way to hit back, or even better, a way to work around them entirely. And while America dealt with the fallout of retaliatory tariffs and rising costs, countries like Canada and the EU were thriving off their new friendship. But this wasn't just economic one-upmanship. There was something bigger at play here, a shift in global alliances. The EU and Canada weren't just skirting tariffs, they were carving out new trade corridors, permanently reshaping how goods flow between major economies. These weren't just deals of convenience, they were partnerships aimed at reducing dependence on the US altogether. And this wasn't lost on the rest of the world. China, for one, has been quick to follow a similar playbook by deepening ties with emerging economies. The US wanted to be the referee in the global trade game, but now it's watching from the sidelines while others rewrite the rule. Europe's partnership with Canada wasn't just about escaping a temporary inconvenience. It was about forging long-term independence from the erratic nature of US policies. What looked like a clever workaround was in reality a strategic shift. When Trump's playbook tried to isolate America, it brought everyone else closer. The foundations of global trade didn't just survive his tariffs, they evolved past them. And as alliances like the one between Europe and Canada strengthen, they're showcasing exactly how interconnected and adaptable the global economy truly is. And yet, this isn't the end of the EU's maneuvering, because as disruptive as these tariffs were, they inspired an even broader, more ambitious strategy, one that's already reshaping the global game board at America's expense. The Trump administration's tariffs didn't just miss the mark, they backfired spectacularly. Instead of boosting the US, they gave Europe and Canada every reason to team up and leave America holding the short end of the trade stick. Through CETA, they sidestepped US barriers, reshaped global trade flows, and strengthened their economies against the very policies meant to weaken them. And now, the US is left watching from the sidelines as global alliances evolve without them. What does this mean for America's future? Trade wars might sound tough, but as we've seen, the ricochet can hit harder than the original shot.